to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I am pumped to have Carl Sack on the show. He is a professional bettor. He used to go by NBA Guru on Dr. Bob's Sports, and he also owns Killer Sports as well. So we'll be talking about the NBA today. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I am doing great. How are you holding up this NBA season?
Pretty good. Can't complain. Little burnt out this time of year, but we got the All-Star break coming up, so I'll have a few days to recharge my batteries.
Excellent. Yep. We all need that. I certainly know what that feels like right after the Super Bowl. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you. As 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Carl, this is the first time I've had you on the pod. Would love to know more about your story. How did you get into sports betting and the NBA in particular?
Geez. Well, I guess it probably started in high school with just with betting with buddies. Looking at the spreads. Back then, it was really newspaper. I don't think that I think the internet was just kind of gaining some momentum, and so we just kind of screwed around. And then I think as I got older and I think when I got into college, learned how to use spreadsheets, learned how to manage a database, learned a little bit more in school about modeling. And I think that once I got those tools, and I, started following some people online, and it grew from there, really.
Sorry, go ahead.
I ended up for a number of years, kind of once you get to maybe 2007 range, I was doing, I don't know why I really landed on NBA. It was just kind of what I was best at and what I felt comfortable. It kind of what made sense to me. Like I just felt good doing it. And it just, I was able to learn, hey, why are the spreads moving and what, just kind of intuitive. And so I ended up posting picks online for a few years, just to kind of document, track record. And then I think it was maybe 2011 or so, I was able to convince Bob to take me on his website, and at the same time was able to convince Sports Insights at the time to hire me as an analyst. And so that I was basically then able to leave corporate finance and start doing this full time, and took off from there.
Excellent. So what do you what were you kind of doing in the corporate finance world, and do you miss it at all?
I worked for a few different companies. I worked for IBM. I worked for what ultimately was a pathology lab that was bought out by Quest Diagnostics. But no, I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed the forecasting and, budgeting and cost analysis and how to do things more efficiently, but it was for industries that I wasn't passionate about the way that I am about sports. And so being able to kind of apply some of that stuff to sports was, what I really wanted to do.
Excellent. Would love to know more about your NBA handicapping. I believe it's mostly totals, but maybe take us through, a 30,000 foot view of how you go about betting the NBA.
Yeah, it's sides and totals, and basically have a math model that I maintain. I go through, the box score of every single game, and I work on kind of looking for anomalies and things that are happening, whether it's, a player had limited minutes because they were in early foul trouble, or a team shot 50% from the 3-point line and attempted a ton, and just kind of work to normalize it and keep a math model and power ratings and on sides and totals. I spend a lot of time doing analysis on individual players and how they impact a team. Getting pretty comfortable with depth charts and rotations. It always, it's impossible to say this player is worth X amount. It's always relative to, well, who's going to get their minutes. LeBron is, worth X amount, but if he's playing on the Olympic team and he sits down and Kevin Durant comes in, like, it's a totally different story than, say, the Lakers. And then I do a lot of situational stuff, using databases to track when those situations come up. So, for example, let's say a team is playing on a back-to-back and they're playing their third game in 4 nights. You can quantify, how much on average that should be worth to the line. You can do some research and see, how well is it typically incorporated into the marketplace. Is the marketplace efficient with that stuff? And so it's kind of it's a blend. It's a blend of fundamental analysis, but also technical analysis, and just really, really following the NBA very closely. Watching a lot of it, being familiar with what different players' strengths and weaknesses are. And a lot of practice, definitely. As there was a number of years where building that math model, you got to track it, and you got to see where does it work well and where does it not work well and why, and trial and error type stuff. But I've gotten pretty comfortable with the NBA currently, and it's always fun to now that there's the player tracking cameras and all the advanced data. It's just getting more and more detailed in the analytical aspect.
Absolutely. When you have this math model, you talked a lot about getting situations in which a player was in foul trouble, couldn't impact the game, and I presume that you're adjusting for those types of things. When you do kind of like the final team-based math model, is it all automated, or are you going in there and being like, oh, well, LeBron didn't care today, so I need to make an adjustment for that?
It is not automated. As much as I would like to just have it be that, there's definitely, I have to apply some common sense to some things and some results. And so, yeah, there's going to be situational type things where performance gets weighted more or less based on a situation that maybe occurred. For example, we're going into the All-Star break after tonight's games, and every team played yesterday. But there's a number of teams that are playing that played yesterday but are not playing today. So it was basically their final game. And you take a team like maybe Charlotte, who is not performing well. I think there's a good chance a team like that is just kind of looking forward to their vacation and maybe not fully focused on their final game against Orlando they played last night. So they lost by 16 points. I may not dock them in my model quite as much for something like that, because I think they kind of maybe had, one foot out the door already. So yeah, there's definitely, a psychological element to it, and as much as I wish that I could just have it all be, boom, all the numbers are there, first thing in the morning. I've done as much as I can, I believe, to automate parts of my processes, but there's just some of it that I can't.
For sure. For sure. So, given the way that you are kind of making some hand adjustments on things, and you're doing stuff with players, like take me back to the preseason. Like, how would you kind of get ready to embark on a new NBA season?
So, I would say the preseason consists of first making sure I'm aware of all the changes that occurred in the offseason, primarily what are the new players, and who left. Also, same thing goes for coaching staff. I'll take a little bit of what we actually see in the preseason into account, but it's more so just kind of looking for quotes. And so I tend to come out early. It's interesting because I know a lot of handicappers, who, especially those who do college sports, they come out pretty strong in early on in the season in terms of their aggression and volume of plays and stuff like that. I'm actually kind of the opposite, where I come in slow. There's some things that are just hard to predict. And so once you get, a week or two into the season and you actually see some of it, it makes it easier for me at least. But there's going to be times where you've got a new coach and he's, all the quotes are, hey, all we're going to do is run, or like Memphis, for example, that they didn't have a new coach, but they were saying in the preseason, like, and they did it in their preseason games, like, we're just going to run, run, run. And you've seen it from day one. Like, they've got the fastest pace in the league, and you can kind of get a feel for how well it's baked into the market, and try to take advantage of some of those things.
Excellent. So with something like that, I mean, you can see that in the data. What about something like Detroit, right? Like a team that was terrible last year, and actually like a team that looks like they're going to make the playoffs now. How long does it take for you to kind of adjust what you expected in the preseason and start betting that?
Um, I would say, so, well, they had a coaching change, which sometimes you think a coach is going to do a good job with a team. And, I thought that Budenholzer was going to be a good match for Phoenix this year. And Phoenix has just been extremely dysfunctional for some reason. But coaching changes certainly can help. I think anticipating player development, young players like Cunningham, like sometimes they get better. I mean, typically everybody as they get older gets, improves. It can be difficult to figure out how big that jump's going to be. But I think that his improvement certainly is a big reason for it. I think, the coach, they got Beasley. I think that was a nice little signing. And I think drafting Thompson, both those Thompson brothers have been really good in their first year, just really good players. And it's hard to know until you see it. It's hard to know how that college, performance is going to translate into the NBA. But I would say after just a couple of weeks, I would say you see it in a couple of weeks, teams starting to play well together, and the quality of, like when I would say definitely within the first couple of weeks of seeing the Thompson brothers play, I was like, wow, like they are athletic. So yeah, I don't know.
But isn't everyone in the NBA though? It's like,
Yeah, right.
can you apply that to impacting the game?
Um, I mean, they just, to me, as athletes, they just really stick out.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I mean, there's, it's all relative, right? Is
Right.
bowl athletic? I don't know. I
Yeah, that's
mean,
true. Yeah. Right. For sure. For sure. You talked a little bit about how you need practice in betting, practice seeing things that you want to incorporate into your handicapping. I presume the Charlotte example that you gave earlier about how they kind of didn't care about the game before the All-Star break, they were trying to get there, was an example of that.
um, yeah. Well, as far as just kind of like, a lot of, I think a lot of handicapping sports um, just comes from learning the hard way and experience. It I don't think it's necessarily logical. At least it wasn't logical to me 20 years ago that, like the day before the All-Star break, like players' minds might not be in it, because I'm not thinking to myself like, how valuable is a vacation for a person who's doing, working every single day, and has been for the last 3 or 4 months, whether it's practice or games or travel or whatnot. And now they get some time to go, get some sun and spend some time with their family and whatnot. And so it makes sense after you kind of learn the hard way. But I think there were probably a few years, 20 years ago, where a game before the break, you just have some no shows, and I'm like scratching my head, like, wow, why did the team perform that way? And um,
Well, but also like not letting that performance like drag down your rating for that team
yeah,
after the break, right? Um, so NBA players like they don't get any off days with the schedule during the season. Like the coaches don't say, "Hey, you had 2 back-to-back games. Let's not practice the next day and have some rest."
I guess it happens sometimes. I think I don't know that they necessarily practice every day that they don't play. Um, I feel like there's a lot of travel. And so I don't think that they have a ton of downtime. I would imagine that, similar to the coaches, that they're watching film and preparing for the next opponent. And um, yeah.
Excellent. You talked a little bit about situational analysis, keeping this database of past situations, and then querying that database to help with your handicapping. This is a part of Killer Sports, a website that you own and have developed. So tell us a little bit more about that, and then how you decide which trends are useful and which trends aren't.
Yeah. So I was Killer Sports was actually developed by a couple of physics professors about 20 plus years ago. And I stumbled onto it, probably, I would say 2007 ish, and was using it to. I mean, you can do it. You can use. I find it hard to understand how people can handicap um, accurately without having access to some sort of a database, whether it's being able to figure out, like, okay, if I'm building a math model, I need to be able to know, like, okay, on average, what is rest worth? Like for football, say a team's got a bye, like you can quantify it, how well they perform or overperform or underperform relative to a team that doesn't. And then also, if you're looking at the situational stuff, how well is it incorporated into the market? Being able to have data to analyze. I don't. I imagine it would be pretty hard to predict things or to create models without having access to it. So, at any rate, I started using their products, and then in about 2001, the they were basically looking to retire, and were just tired of kind of maintaining the website. They always just kind of did it as a hobby in their spare time, and it was, it's so there's definitely work involved in collecting data, and making sure it's as accurate as possible. And so they kind of wanted to get out of the business, and I was like, well, hey, I use your product all the time. I love it, and I've got some ideas on how I can make it better. Why don't I buy it from you? So that's how things went about 3 years ago, and we've spent the last 3 years rebuilding the websites and creating some new tools, and just making it, I kind of in a selfish way made it so that I can use those tools to the best of my ability and what I think is useful. When you talk about trends, so to speak, I think the trends that I incorporate into my handicapping, I try to make sure that they're logical. Like anybody can find a trend or backfit some silly number. The Patriots have won 12 straight games on Thursday nights against the NFC East or something silly that just doesn't make sense. But
Yep.
if you find something that, to use football again, like back in the day when, Brady and Belichick were together, like they would always do well off of a loss. They would always bounce back off of a loss and performed well ATS. And people started over the years to start to quote that and say, oh, Brady Belichick off a loss. It's, they're 25-7 ATS or whatever. And I think
Sure.
getting to know players and just finding those trends that make sense, logically, I think that's the most important thing.
So the Brady and Belichick thing does make sense to you because
well, they were
they're an excellent
dominant,
pair.
both dominant, both very competitive players, and I think you see similar stuff in the NBA. If if Curry is off of a loss, when Golden State was in their elite years, anytime that team would lose, and we're even seeing it now with the Celtics. They're kind of a bored team where anytime they're like, I don't know, 12-1 or 12-2 coming off of a loss ATS. But when they win, they're just awful the next game, and it's almost like they're bored. So I think there's some situations where you can expect certain players to be more focused or less focused. And for athletes, I think when you're coming off of a loss, not only is it an opportunity to get your attention and make sure that you're focused, but there's also adjustments that can be made. You can go back, you can look. It's hard when you're playing well and winning. It's hard to go back and look and find adjustments and say, oh, well, we could have done things better. But when you lose, it
Right.
usually there's a few things you can point to as to why you lost, and then you can work in between games on improving those specific things.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not like there's any kind of sample size, you're doing some kind of statistical analysis and p-values or anything when you're searching the database. It's kind of more like, does it make sense, right? Like, does this make sense from a sports perspective?
I think with the smaller sample size stuff, it's got to be logical. I think there are some times in the past where I've found things that to me at the time weren't logical, but the sample size was so large that I had to acknowledge it and kind of figure it out. For example, like in the NBA, games tend to be lower scoring if they're afternoon games. And that didn't make sense to me. Like I just couldn't wrap my head around why that would be the case. But the sample size was massive. I mean, this was over 10, 15, 20 years of data. Like it's just lower scoring for afternoon games. And I factored it in somewhat, but it took me a while to kind of really understand the logic behind it, and that it's largely biorhythm driven, that players are used to being on a schedule, used to playing at night, not used to, waking up at noon and having a game. And so they're just kind of off a little bit, so to speak. And then you start to hear quotes from players say, oh, I hate day games. And, we always come out a little bit slow or a little bit rusty in the early on, stuff like that. It's not anything that's like crazy, but it's worth a point or so to the total.
Yeah, that matters.
Yeah, and it adds up. But yeah, no, for the most part, I do want to. I don't follow any. It's hard to give. It's hard to weight a trend unless it really makes a lot of sense. But there are some examples where just the sample size is so large, and that's one of the things I like about basketball. With NFL, it can be hard because you only have 15, 20 games a season. With NBA, they're playing every 2 to 3 days, and it's 82 game season, and then another 20 or so in the playoffs, whatever. But yeah, there are some things where the sample size is so large that you just have to kind of say, hey, I mean, what are the chances that this is just random?
Right.
But yeah, I definitely try to avoid those overfitted, backfitted, trends where it's just like 10 different variables and
sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And, the game changes too. So, I mean, in the NBA, you do have a nice sample size of games every season. But, when I first started following the NBA, everyone played 82 games, right? And then at some point they got smart and were like, yeah, we need a little bit of load management here. And it's, they really shouldn't be playing 82 games, right? That's like a relic of an era where they were making most of their money from ticket sales, right? And in the modern era, like, these media contracts mean a lot more, right? But I guess the owners have still decided that they need 82 games, even though it's not the best for their players. So yeah, but it is nice that you do have that sample size in the NBA, and then you can be, a little bit more. You get a bigger sample size if you want to study something, knowing that the game is always changing, right?
Yeah, and I mean, in basketball too. There's at least in the NBA, there's 100 possessions per game. It's a round ball. It's just, for me, it's more intuitive and easier to predict. Football, it really is a game of inches. Like, you throw a ball, and if you're off by 2 or 3 inches, it could be a pick six that totally changes a game. Whereas with basketball, it's just like the worst thing that happens is you turn the ball over and it's 2 points the other direction. Okay, well, now we've got 99 more possessions. Like,
yeah, for sure. So, Carl, a couple Sundays ago, my phone blew up, and it was a lot of friends that don't really follow the NBA, but they were all talking about this trade: Luka Doncic going to the Lakers, Anthony Davis going to the Mavs. Just give us kind of your quick reaction on, like how. So let's, Anthony Davis going over the Mavs. Obviously, he's hurt right now, but more of a defensive presence than Luka was. How that might change a total for you?
Oh, definitely, yeah. From a side perspective, I don't know. I didn't make that much of a adjustment. I think that both teams are going to have to get used to playing with their new player. Now, assessing the trade overall, I think, is a completely different question that's
Sure.
out of my realm in terms of looking at the contracts and projecting how well the player's going to do and are they going to re-sign and all that kind of stuff. So that's not something that I feel well equipped to talk about. But in terms
It's okay.
of how
everyone has an opinion about that,
right?
So,
yeah, no, everybody's certainly.
From that.
I know a lot of Dallas fans are upset, but I don't know. I don't know if it was a good trade or a bad trade. Time will tell, and it's hard to also say what would have happened had the trade not occurred. Like, would Luka have stayed and signed? Like, we just don't know the answers to all those questions. But in terms of how it impacts the teams right away, I think that there's definitely some things that we can do. And while, like I said, I don't think it, at least from my perspective, from my power ratings, Luke, and there were more pieces than I think Kleber was also a part of that. so it wasn't just a 1-for-1 necessarily. But if we want to look at it as just a 1-for-1 for the sake of conversation, from a power rating perspective, it didn't change my numbers very much at all. From a totals perspective, it definitely does, because, like you said, Anthony Davis is a defender. He brings size to that team. Luka's just, defense is not his forte. He plays a completely different position, and I think he's going to bring more playmaking and more speed to the Lakers. And so, yeah, I definitely, I bet the Lakers total over last night. And I think looking towards Dallas unders probably makes sense too. Although now AD's so unfortunately hurt. That's just such a wild. I feel bad for Dallas Mavericks fans. With the roller coaster of, getting him, and then he comes out and in his very first game, he plays awesome. And then in the third quarter, he injures himself. And now he's out for a significant, it's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's
the nature of the NBA, I guess.
Yeah. And he's kind of always been hurt. And
yeah, both of them have struggled with staying healthy. It seems like Luka's always missing time here and there as well. So I don't know.
It's all conditioning, right?
I don't know. Sometimes it's just bad luck, and sometimes
it is just bad luck.
I don't know.
For sure. Carl Sack, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Please let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Like I said, Killer Sports is the website where all the handicapping tools are for aspiring handicappers or people just looking to do some research and get some hard data. And then Killer Cappers is where I sell my picks. My NBA stuff is there. And we've got 3 or 4 other guys that I've vetted pretty thoroughly that are sharp handicappers that put out some good stuff, especially for NBA for sure. So yeah.
Awesome. How much, if I want to do my own research on killersports.com, like how much does it cost me and what do I get?
So I think we have it set up where you can do like a few days for free to try it out. And even I think the cheapest package is like $20 or something, like $20 a month or something like that. And that'll get you access to a fair amount of information.
And how many sports?
That's a good question. We've got NBA, NFL, college football, college basketball, NHL, WNBA. We added women's and men's tennis recently, although that's still a bit of a work in progress. Baseball, MLB, and we'd like to add some more sports for sure. We'd like to get into golf and soccer, and hopefully those will be right around the corner.
Carl, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. It's good talking to you.
Absolutely was. You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can grab my free sports betting newsletter. This includes 5 Nuggets Saturday. Check it out at thepowerrank.com. Also, as we head into March Madness, you'll be able to get my March Madness cheat sheet, which was very, very profitable last year when UConn cut down the Nets. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, and I'll talk to you again soon.